Namo Ramanaya, Michael. Thank you for speaking with me.
Namo Ramanaya.
So I would like to go over some questions with you that I generated with the help of artificial intelligence. It wants to stump you, and I don't think it can, but let's see how it goes. I haven't read these in detail, this particular version, so let's see how it goes. It's called 9 Philosophical Challenges for Michael James. So these are offered in the spirit you articulate in your explanations of verse 2 of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, that considering opposing views can help us think more deeply and discover weaknesses in our reasons for believing what we believe. They target the philosophical framework, not the practice itself. So number 1, the sleep argument. Every claim you make about sleep is made from waking by ego. The very faculty you say distorts everything. Your film frame argument, if sleep were unconsciousness, we wouldn't perceive the gap, fails. A anesthetized patient perceives a gap without having been conscious during it. The gap is inferred upon waking, not experienced during sleep. And I slept well may mean nothing disturbed me, absence of disturbance, not presence of happiness. Further, you say sleep is insufficient, Vāsanās survive, hence manolaya, not manonasa. Yet you use sleep as evidence for Sat-Chit-Ānanda. You cannot have it both ways.
Well, okay, there are many things there. Firstly, yes, obviously we're talking from a perspective of ego, but we need to understand what ego is. Ego is not something wholly other than the Sat-Chit that we actually are. That is, ego derives its... Ego is what is described as Cit-Jaḍa-Granthi, the knot formed by the entanglement of Chit and Jada. The Chit element is Sat-Chit, the Jada element is the body that we take ourselves to be. So as ego, we are neither this body nor are we Sat-Chit, but we derive our being and our awareness from Sat-Chit, and we derive our limitations from the body that we take ourselves to be. So the substance is Sat-Chit, the form is the body. The body means not just the physical form of the body, but all the 5 sheaths. So what remains in sleep is not ego, but the essence of ego, which is Sat-Chit. So as ego, we have a recollection that we were in a state in which we were not aware of anything. Not aware of anything means we were not aware of any phenomena. But in order to be aware that we were in such a state, we must have been aware in that state. So awareness does continue, even in the absence of ego. And the awareness that remains in sleep is the same awareness that is now illuminating ego. So there is no contradiction from that perspective. What we recollect about sleep is not our existence as ego, but our mere existence. In other words, we don't remember any identity in sleep, but we do remember our being. The difference between our being, that is, ego is an identity. You can't have an identity without an underlying being. But so when we say I am, we're expressing our being, our existence. When we say I am this or I am that, we're expressing an identity. That is, in English, we use the verb to be both to denote existence and to denote to denote an identity. That is, we use it as a copula. Copula means I am this or I am that. There, am is serving as a copula. It's identifying one thing with another thing. Whereas in the case of I am alone, am is not, it isn't functioning as a copula, it's functioning denoting existence, being. It's our own being. That's why Bhagavan always distinguished I am from I am this or that. I am is what we actually are. I am this or that is ego. But it's the same I. They're not, it's not more than one I. The same I in its pure condition is what we actually are. Mixed and conflated with adjuncts, it becomes ego.
Okay, so
that's part of it, but I haven't fully answered because there were more to it than that. But my poor mind can't grasp too much at a time, so you have to break it down into small little bite-sized chunks for me to handle it.
Sorry about that. This was actually an abridged version because it wrote a lot.
Yeah, but
so,
remember, AI is super intelligent. I've only got a little flickering of intelligence, so you have to make concessions for me.
Okay, I'm going to read the whole thing again and then see if there's any part that you want to take up again. So,
yeah.
Every claim you make about sleep is made from waking by ego. The very faculty you say distorts everything. Your film frame argument, if sleep were unconsciousness, we wouldn't perceive the gap, fails. An anesthetized patient perceives a gap without having...
Why does it fail? Why does it fail?
I think
even whether it's in the case of sleep or it's in the case of anesthesia, we are aware of a gap. People, when they wake from anesthesia, people often who've been under general anesthesia, they say it's different from sleep, because in sleep you're aware of a gap, in general anesthesia you're not. But you are aware of a gap, actually. In my experience, I've been under general anesthesia. It's some waking from general anesthesia is in some, from the perspective of ego in the waking state, it seems to be something different. But actually, it's the same. We don't cease to exist in general anesthesia. We don't cease to be aware. But we are possibly at a, and this is relative only to. This isn't a difference in the actual states, but relative to from the perspective of ego. We are, so to speak, more deeply asleep in general anesthesia. People are cutting us and everything, which even if in sleep, if someone just comes and touches us or shakes us, we wake up. Whereas in the case of general anesthesia, they may be cutting open, drilling a hole in our skull and operating on our brain or operating on our heart, we don't wake up. So in that sense, we are more deeply asleep in general anesthesia when we are in sleep. But the difference is only a difference from the perspective of ego in waking state. So it's again, it's a seeming difference. But there's we cannot be aware of the absence of awareness. We can be aware of the absence of phenomena, but not the absence of awareness. Because if awareness were absent, we wouldn't be aware of it. So the very fact that we're aware of having been in a different state means that we were aware in that state. And if we analyze what we actually are, if we think very deeply, what are we most essentially? We are awareness. Everything else are adjuncts, attributes, things we impose upon ourselves, things we identify with. But what we are most fundamentally is awareness. And the nature of awareness is to be aware. There's no such thing as, from a perspective of awareness, there's no such thing as non-awareness. just like non-existence doesn't exist. So there's no such thing as non-existence. There's no such thing as non-awareness.
So it
Because
says
any seeming non-awareness appears in the view of that which is aware.
So it says the gap is inferred upon waking, not experienced during sleep. And I slept well may mean nothing disturbed me, absence of disturbance, not presence of happiness. Further, you say sleep is insufficient, Vāsanās survive, hence monolaya, not mononasa, yet you use sleep as evidence.
Wait.
Sorry.
Wait, slowly. The gap isn't inferred. We are aware of having been in a state in which we were not aware of anything. That is not an inference. We clearly know we were in a state in which we were not aware of anything. So it's not a mere inference.
Good. And then
there's an experiential difference between waking and dream on one hand and sleep on the other hand. We actually experience the difference.
And then it says, and I slept well may mean nothing disturbed me, absence of disturbance, not presence of happiness.
Absence of disturbance is happiness.
Yeah. Further, you say sleep is insufficient, Vāsanās survive, hence monolaya, not mononasa, yet you use sleep as evidence for Sat-Chit-Ānanda. You cannot have it both ways.
Yeah, well, okay. If we, again, this is a very deep and subtle thing. The ego is absent in sleep. Because ego is absent, its Vāsanās are absent. But what is present is Sat-Chit, the pure awareness I am, which is the very essence of ego. So what remains in sleep is ego stripped of all its adjuncts. Ego stripped of all its adjuncts is Sat-Chit. It's not ego anymore. So that's not that objection doesn't stand.
Very good. And then
okay, let me try to view it. Let me try to be more charitable to the explanation. What it's saying is, I think the problem that people often raise about this is, if ego doesn't exist in sleep, how can it come into existence again? Well, the truth is, if we investigate ego, we will find it doesn't exist even now. The existence of ego is only a semi-existence. So it seems to exist in waking and dream. It doesn't seem to exist in sleep. But so long as we take its semi-existence to be real existence, then we can raise the question: how, if it didn't exist in sleep, can it come into existence again? What ceases to exist can't come into existence again. Well, the truth is, what actually exists never comes into existence or ceases to exist. It always is. So anything that comes into existence is not a real existence.
Okay. I had it anticipate your possible reactions. Just for more context, I fed it a number of your writings and some video transcripts and all sorts of things. And so it generated all of this. I didn't suggest anything. So I had it anticipate your possible responses and then to provide another response. So it says, you'd say, being consciousness existed in sleep even if knowing consciousness didn't. Distinguishing sleep as a state proves awareness during it. But that's circular. The evidence that we're aware in sleep is the conclusion the argument is supposed to establish. I distinguish Tuesday from Wednesday without having been conscious through the night.
it's not just an argument. It's our actual experience. We actually experience. We are aware I slept. How are we aware I slept? Because we were aware of being in that state that we call sleep. And that state we call sleep is a state in which we are not aware of anything. So what is absent in sleep is not absence of awareness, but absence of objects of awareness, phenomena, content of awareness, whatever we want to call it. So it's not just an argument. It's pointing out what is our actual experience.
Good. Okay, this is challenge number 2. Intransitive awareness. Your distinction between intransitive awareness, sutatra arivu, and transitive awareness is introduced and maintained entirely from within transitive awareness. You point to the sense of I am as intransitive awareness present now, but I am in waking always has some content. You need awareness with zero content. What is the experiential difference between aware of nothing and not aware?
Not aware is not an experience. The very fact that we experience not being aware of anything is I mean, it's a matter. This is a matter of seeing things clearly. That is, the arguments are there to help us to see what is actually our experience. That is, we all experience sleep. There are 2 ways of interpreting it. Either we can interpret it as sleep was awareness was absent in sleep, or we can interpret it as phenomena were absent in sleep. But the very fact that we experience that state shows that awareness is there. So the only reasonable interpretation of our experience in sleep is that what is absent in sleep is phenomena, not absence of awareness. Because if awareness were absent, there would be no experience at all. There'd be no sleep at all. It would be just like we cannot. The reason we cannot. The film seems to be a continuous moving picture, even though actually it's a series of still frames, is because we don't have the grasp. We're not able to grasp the gap between them. But in the case of sleep, we very clearly grasp a gap. If actually there were no awareness in sleep, what our experience would be an unbroken series of alternating states of waking and dream, without any break between them. But we do experience gaps between successive states of waking and dream. Those gaps are what we call sleep. The very fact that we are aware of those gaps means that we must have been aware that those gaps are not absence of awareness, they're absence of content of awareness, objects of awareness.
So then it says, you'd say practice demonstrates awareness.
Can I just say, if we take these things as mere philosophical arguments, we can go on arguing for all eternity. The aim of these arguments, if we are to call them arguments, they are pointing out to us what should be obvious to us. So if we think about it carefully, we are not convinced just by the arguments. We should be convinced by considering our own experience and understanding understanding the significance of our experience, understanding the implication of our experience. No, even that it's somehow it's inadequate when we put it in words, but it is pointing out to us what should be clear to us. So in order to understand this, it's not a matter of analyzing arguments. It's a matter of carefully considering our experience and recognizing, seeing what we have been overlooking, which is the fact that sleep is not a state of non-awareness. It's a state of it's not a state of absence of awareness. It's a state of absence of objects of awareness.
Okay. It then says, you'd say practice demonstrates awareness is independent of content. The gap between thoughts shows this, but minimal content is not zero content. Every waking experience of I am has something it is like. Waking experience cannot bridge the gap to the zero content awareness you posit for sleep.
That's why in the waking state, by turning our attention back to ourselves, we are penetrating back into the fundamental awareness in which the appearance of waking, dream, and sleep come and go, appear and disappear.
Good. Okay, challenge 3, the instrument problem. Ego is a formless phantom that must investigate itself. Your analogies, wedding imposter, sadhu's dog, rabbit, all involve an investigator other than what is investigated. You note this disanalogy yourself. Your resolution, the practice is just being, not doing, faces a dilemma. If just cessation, it's indistinguishable from sleep. If cessation plus alertness, something is maintaining that alertness.
Can you read that again?
Sure.
I'm just trying to understand what the objection is.
Okay. This is the first time I'm reading this too, just to clarify. Ego is a formless phantom that must investigate itself. Your analogies, wedding imposter, sadhu's dog, rabbit, all involve an investigator other than what is investigated. You note this disanalogy yourself. Your resolution, the practice is just being, not doing, faces a dilemma. If just cessation, it's indistinguishable from sleep. If cessation plus alertness, something is maintaining that alertness.
Yes, we as ego are maintaining alertness to our own being, our own awareness. Usually, our attention is going outwards towards phenomena. In self-investigation, our attention is going back towards the experiencer of phenomena. And by attending to the experiencer of phenomena, we thereby penetrate through the experiencer to what underlies the experiencer. Just like if you look carefully at what seems to be a snake, if you look at it carefully enough, you'll see, oh, it's not a snake, it's just a rope. If we look at ourselves carefully enough, we will see what we actually are. We will penetrate through the appearance back to the underlying reality.
It actually anticipated it this time.
Let's see. As far as the thing about in the case of these analogies, there's another one who's doing the investigating. Yeah, no analogy is perfect. Every analogy has its limitations. When we use analogies, we have to understand what is analogous and take it that far. We can't extend it beyond a certain point. But so we need to understand what the analogy is supposed to illustrate. And of course, every analogy has its limitations. It's not going to be a perfect analogy.
So it says, the
analogies, and people sometimes talk about argument from analogy. But I think to take an analogy as an argument is expecting too much from an analogy. An analogy is an aid for us to understand. It's an aid to understanding. It is not an argument in itself.
Good point. It says, you'd say the rope snake analogy, just look at what's there. Self-investigation is ceasing to attend outward. Attention subsides while remaining alert to I am. But maintaining alertness is a function. If grace maintains it, ego contributes nothing and your exhortations are misdirected. If ego maintains it, we're back to bootstrapping. What holds awareness at that intermediate point?
Yes, it is ego who is to maintain that alertness. It is ego that is to keep its attention fixed on its own being. So the self-investigation is necessary only for the ego. And it's only the ego that needs to do self-investigation and that can do self-investigation. The thing is, when ego attends to itself, it so long as it's attending to other things, it seems to be bound to certain adjuncts. When it looks back at itself to see what it actually is, it thereby sheds those adjuncts and remains as it actually is.
Ready for the next one?
Yes.
Challenge 4, the happiness equivocation. You equivocate between A, absence of suffering, and B, positive Ānanda. Sleep establishes at most A. You need B. The self-love argument has an internal problem. The self that loves itself is the ego you call illusory. Ego's testimony is treated as reliable here, while unreliable everywhere else.
It is that is from the fact that as ego, we love ourselves. We can understand that it is the nature of awareness to love itself. So again, these are all in a certain sense, these are philosophical arguments. But in a deeper sense, the aim of these arguments is to help us to see what is actually our own experience. The absence of misery. Why is the absence of misery happiness? Because happiness is the fundamental reality. It is obscured by the appearance of misery. But if you remove misery, what remains is happiness. A state free of misery is a perfectly happy state. So to imagine that there's a state between a state in which there's no misery but also no happiness. There is no such, experientially, there is no such state. To the extent to which misery subsides, the underlying reality, happiness, shines forth. So the absence of misery is happiness, because happiness is the underlying reality. Misery is just an appearance.
Okay. You'd say happiness is not added to being.
But misery is an appearance. Pleasure and pain are both appearances. But these appearances are, the more the mind is agitated, the more discontented, the more we suffer. The more the agitation of the mind calms down, the more the inherent peace and happiness and contentment shines forth.
You'd say happiness is not added to being, it is being. Paragraph 14 of Nāṇyar says happiness and Atma-Svarupa are not different, but that identification is the claim at issue. Citing it as a premise is circular, and wanting to be rid of a headache proves headaches are unnatural, not that what is natural is positive bliss rather than neutral equanimity.
Again, it's pointing to our experience. In sleep, there is no ego and therefore no misery. Therefore, it's a state of perfect contentment, perfect satisfaction. There's no dissatisfaction. In the absence of dissatisfaction, in the absence of discontent, what remains is contentment or satisfaction.
Okay, challenge 5, grace and effort. Satvasana can't come from ego, contrary to its nature, so it comes from grace. But Atma-Svarupa, quote, never does anything. Yet we must cooperate. You say the tiger won't swallow us until we're willing, but also that our willingness is itself grace. If effort is grace, grace doesn't need our cooperation. If it does, that cooperation must come from somewhere other than grace. Your exhortations to ego have no addressee.
That is, grace is ever present. We need to yield, we need to be willing to yield ourselves to grace. But that willingness to yield ourselves to grace itself comes from grace. Because the nature of ego is to grasp form, to grasp things other than itself. So long as it grasps things other than itself, that is a state of rising. Rising as ego and grasping other things are one and the same thing. So when instead of grasping other things, if we try to grasp ourselves, we as ego subside. So that in order to grasp our own being, we must be willing to subside. That willingness to subside is itself the working of grace. So these are very simple things, but at the same time very subtle things. So if we are viewing these as arguments and looking for holes in the argument, we can go on arguing for all eternity. But the aim of all these arguments, they are pointers, trying to help us see things clearly. If we grasp what is being pointed at, if we see it clearly, then there's no doubt about it. But if we take it merely as conceptual arguments, we are failing to see what is being pointed out. That in philosophy, there are so many different philosophies. And because philosophers are seeing things differently. In India, there's no exact word for philosophy, but the closest equivalent is Darśana. Darśana means view, means seeing. So different people see the same thing in different ways. So the aim of Bhagavan's teachings and Advaita more generally is to help us to see things clearly by taking things back to the basics. So these arguments, I mean, we can take them as philosophical arguments, but in a certain respect, they are philosophical arguments. But the aim of a philosophical argument is to help us to see more clearly, to see to interpret our experience more critically and more clearly. So this is a critique of our own experience. These arguments are intended to critique our own experience in order to help us to see to see more clearly, to see our experience in a clearer light. We see an external world. Superficial view is there's an external world. An external world exists. But if we begin to analyze these things, we can see that just the fact that we perceive an external world is not evidence of the actual existence of the external world. It just shows an external world seems to exist. In whose view does it seem to exist? It seems to exist in the view of ourself as ego. When we don't rise as ego, as in sleep, there's no appearance of an external world. So all these arguments are intended to help us see through the wrong assumptions we've been making. But in order to understand these, we must be willing to see clearly. The majority of people are not willing to see these things clearly. That's why even within Vedanta, where these things are taught so clearly in the Upanishads, in the Brahma Sutra, in the Bhagavad Gita, these things are taught very clearly for those who have eyes to see it. But for those who don't want to see it, they will take the same words to mean something else. That's why there are so many different interpretations of Vedanta, which is fine, because different interpretations suit people at different stages of spiritual development. Some people have to say, oh, there's so many arguments against Advaita. Yes, sure, there are so many arguments against Advaita, but just the fact that there are arguments against Advaita doesn't mean that Advaita is incorrect. It's just that those who produce those arguments are just not seeing the force of the Advaitic point of view. They cannot, they're not able to, they fail to have that Advaita Darshana, that Advaitic view they're lacking. So all these arguments are intended to help us see more clearly. But we will see more clearly only if we're willing to see more clearly. If we're not willing to see more clearly, we'll find so many flaws in the argument. You can find flaws in any argument. I mean, if you're taking it merely as a conceptual, merely as conceptual arguments, but this is the aim of Bhagavan's teaching. The aim of Advaita more generally is helping us to see what should be obvious to us. But in order to see what is obvious, we need to see through the fallacy of things that we have naively assumed to be obvious. Yes, it's obvious that there's an external world. It's obvious that I'm this body. I'm a biological organism or whatever. It seems to be obvious if we haven't considered the matter critically enough. If we begin to consider it critically, then we begin to see that all these things begin to fall apart. So it's all a matter ultimately of seeing clearly. As I say, in Indian philosophy, philosophies are called Darśana. They're different views. But the ultimate aim of all philosophies is Tattva Darshana. Tattva, we can translate as real, but the etymology of Tattva is thatness. That means seeing as it is. So Tattva Darshana is seeing as it is. So this is what we are trying to see things as they are. So these arguments are helping us, pointing us in the right direction. But ultimately, to see things as they are, we need to see ourselves as we are. We need to see the tattva of ourself. According to Bhagavan, we ourselves are the tattva. Tane tane tattvam idane tane kartavaya arunachala. Oneself alone is tattva. It's what is real. Idane tane kartavaya arunachala. Show this to me yourself, Arunachala. Arunachala, of course, is not something other than tan, oneself, because because what is real is only oneself. So Arunachala, who is ourself, needs to reveal this to us itself.
You'd say from ego's perspective, effort is real. From the absolute perspective, there's only I am I. The train carries everything, just put down the luggage. But whether I put it down is itself God's will. The instruction has no normative force. The exhortations become purely causal, mechanical triggers, rather than normative, reasons for a rational agent. You should try harder becomes no different from the wind should blow harder.
Again, this is... I see no weight in these arguments. We need to be... the effort we make to turn within is an effort born of our willingness, our love to know what we actually are. If we love to know what we actually are, we will love to look at ourselves very carefully, attend to ourselves very carefully. But that love to attend to ourselves carefully, that is grace. So the grace works through us. So the effort we make is the working of grace. So it's not two things, effort or grace. There's only one thing, is grace. And that grace works through us in the form of our effort.
Ready for challenge 6?
Yeah.
Dṛṣṭi-Sṛṣṭi-Vāda. If everything I perceive is my projection, then you, Bhagavan, and Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu are my projections. The teaching has no independent authority. Your decades of Tamil scholarship are my dream ego correcting its own dream content.
Yes, okay, fine. But again, all these teachings are they're intended as pointers. If we want to, we cannot know the reality of what is seen without knowing the reality of the seer. If a person is wearing green glasses, they'll see everything as green. So we need to know we first need to know the reality of the experiencer, the perceiver. So these teachings are intended to turn our attention back towards ourselves. Who am I to whom all these other things appear? There's no evidence, no reason to suppose that anything exists independent of our perception of it. So let us first know the reality of ourselves, and then let us worry about the reality of other things. The natural common sense view, the natural presumption, is that the world exists independent of our perception of it. Dṛṣṭi-Sṛṣṭi-Vāda challenges that. What evidence do we have that anything exists independent of our perception of it? If we think about it, there can't be any evidence. Philosophers may give their own reasons, but for example, I just heard one argument given by a philosopher the other day. Oh yes, well, who was it? Someone he. Oh, I think it's that man who on Closer to Truth, who is saying that there's one consciousness or something. Someone wrote to me about that and asked, is this not the same as Bhagavan's teachings? And I replied an email pointing out the differences. And one of the things one of the arguments he gives for the existence of an external world, if there weren't we see order in the external world. We see things follow a certain pattern. So if there weren't an external world, there wouldn't if it was just left to experience would be completely random. But why? Yes, there is order in what we perceive, but why should we believe that the order is external? Why not? Why not consider that the order may be internal? It's because of the order in the external world is a reflection of that is the mind that projects the world, projects an ordered world. So there's so many arguments. I mean, I've heard so many arguments. Another philosopher, someone called James Laderman. He's a professor in Bristol University, and he's a specialist in the philosophy of science. In one of his books, he says the reason he considers external world skepticism, and he says we can safely set that aside because the existence of an external world, he said the argument on which we can base the existence of an external world is argument to the, inference to the best explanation. IBE, he calls it, inference to the best explanation. So what inference will give the best explanation for everything? So he said the best explanation for the appearance of the world is that there is actually an external world, because it fits with all our science and all our other everything else that we know. But all our science and all that we know is based upon the belief that there's an external world. So to say that an external world is the best explanation for all that we believe is a circular explanation. So whatever reason people give for believing in an external world, there are flaws in all those reasons. And there's definitely no evidence that there's an external world. The external world means a mind-independent world. So what Dṛṣṭi-Sṛṣṭi is, when there's no evidence that there's an external world, why should we shackle ourselves with the belief that this world exists independent of our perception of it? Of course, we can't prove that there's no world independent of our. In terms of philosophical argument, we can't argue. We can't. We can give arguments on either side, but we can't prove that there is an external world or that there isn't an external world. But if we go by the principle of parsimony, Occam's razor, the simplest explanation that this world is just a dream, then we don't have to. If we say this world is not a dream, but it exists independent, we are assuming so many things. So, but our aim is not either to prove that there is an external world or is not an external world. Since there's no evidence that there's an external world, let's not shackle ourselves with this belief that there's an external world. To whom did this world appear? To me. Find out the reality of the experiencer, then we'll be in a better position to assess the reality of what is experienced. So the aim of Bhagavan's teachings and Advaita more generally is to point us back to the need for us to know the reality of ourselves. And in order to know the reality of ourselves, we need to investigate ourselves. We need to attend to ourselves. We need to look very closely at ourselves to see what we actually are.
You'd say a dream alarm clock can wake the dreamer, and the objection is self-undermining. But
again, what is meant by that? A dream alarm clock can wake a dreamer. That is, we could be dreaming, and an alarm clock could go off, and that could cause us to leave that dream and come to this waking state, or it could cause us to wake up from one dream into another dream. I think most of us have experienced at times, but we wake up in the morning and we begin to go about our normal daily activities. We may be rushing to get to work or something, and we realize we're late for a train or something, and then suddenly we wake up and we find, no, we have got plenty of time to get up and brush our teeth and do whatever we need to do, and grab a quick coffee or something, and we'll catch the train. So there are times when within a dream, we wake up from a dream, but the state into which we wake up turns out to be another dream. But I don't know what bearing that has on this objection, because I don't fully understand this objection. Will you continue reading it?
Yes, but the tu quoque universalizes the problem rather than dissolving it. And tu quoque, an unusual philosophical term, means a retort charging an adversary with being or doing what the adversary criticizes in others. So the tu quoque...
Now we know what tu quoque is. Continue.
The tu quoque universalizes the problem rather than dissolving it. Your entire literary output operates on pragmatic realism. Your framework denies. If the teaching is a dream alarm clock, present it as a useful fiction, not as what actually is.
Oh, I see what they're saying. He's saying that the teaching is a dream, as an alarm clock in the dream intended to wake us up to real state. Okay. Again, what the teaching is pointing us back, is pointing our attention back to ourselves. It is impressing upon us the need to know the reality of ourselves. This is not a mere philosophy, but philosophy, there is philosophy, very solid philosophy, but the philosophy is not an end in itself. The philosophy there's a practical implication of this philosophy. The practical implication is that we need to investigate and know what we actually are. Before we can know the reality of anything else, we first need to know the reality of ourselves. Let us first know the reality of ourselves, and then let us see if anything else remains for us to know the reality of. According to Bhagavan, if we know the reality of ourselves, there's nothing else for us to know, because we alone are what actually exists. And everything else is an appearance in the view of ego. And when we investigate ourselves, ego will thereby be dissolved, because ego is a false awareness of ourselves, something other than what we actually are. When ego is dissolved, everything else is dissolved, and what remains is what we always actually are, the reality of ourselves.
Okay, challenge 7.
If we take it as even many Advaitins take this as a philosophy. They go on and on studying the scriptures and the commentaries on the scriptures and the discussions about this and the supplementary texts and everything. For them, it's still only conceptual. The whole point of Advaita is what is the meaning of Tattvamasi? You are that. That means we need to, we need not concern ourselves with that. there's no that other than you. Who am I? So the aim of the teaching Tattvamasi, you are that. That is, whatever we are seeking, we ourselves are that. So we need to investigate ourselves. We can go on analyzing what is the meaning of Tat and what is the meaning of Tvam, and how they are linked, and so what the Asi means. All these things, we can go on analyzing it ad infinitum, but we're missing the point. The whole point is, as Bhagavan says very clearly in Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, when the scriptures say, you are that, instead of investigating, what am I? If we go on thinking, I am not this, I am that, that is only weakness of mind. So we need to understand this philosophy is not an end in itself. The philosophy is pointing to something beyond itself.
Challenge 7, Unfalsifiability. If someone agrees, they understand. If they disagree, they haven't practiced enough. If the record contradicts you, if the record contradicts you, the recorder misunderstood. If claims can't be verified, verification requires dissolving the verifier. No counter evidence can enter this system.
Yeah, because this isn't meant to be just a system of philosophy. This is meant to be more than that. It's meant to impress upon us the need for us to investigate and know what we actually are. That is the whole point of it. Yes, we can consider counter-arguments, but we can also, in my experience, whatever counter-arguments there are, that is Advaita, such a robust philosophy that any counter-arguments can be very easily repudiated, can be undermined by within Advaita, there are grounds for repudiating every other type of philosophy. So this is an extremely robust philosophy, but it's not a mere philosophy. It's a philosophy with a purpose. That purpose is turning our attention back to ourselves to know what we actually are. So this is a practical science. It's not a science in the sense of it's not an objective science, but this is the true science of consciousness. Consciousness, that which is conscious, investigating itself. We can also say it's a science of being. We're investigating being to know the reality, what actually is. All other things seem to exist in the view of ourself as ego. So let us first know the reality of ego. Even ego is a semi-existent because it comes into being and it ceases to be. So it's not the ultimate being. So all other things derive their seeming existence from the semi-existence of ourself as ego. Ego derives its semi-existence from the real existence of what we actually are. So we need to investigate what we actually are.
You'd say the teaching is testable by practice. The nature of the subject requires that verification eliminates the verifier. But if I taste food to test sweetness, tasting doesn't destroy me. Your test destroys the tester. This puts the teaching in the same epistemic category as claims about the afterlife. That's legitimate, but should be acknowledged rather than concealed behind the language of rational demonstration.
Well, the rational demonstration has its limits. The aim of this philosophy is to point us to the need to know the reality of ourself. So the destruction of the verifier is itself a verification, because what then remains is the underlying reality of that verifier, which is what we actually are. We are the verifier. We are the ones who are seeking to verify this. We who are seeking to verify this will cease to exist as a separate entity when we know the reality of ourselves. When we know the reality of ourselves, this ego that we're seeking to verify these teachings will dissolve, and what will remain is the one reality, that the one thing that actually exists, which is ourself as such it. But we need to, it's up to, if we are convinced by this philosophy needs to convince us only to the extent that we need to understand the imperative to know the reality of ourselves before we can know the reality of any other thing. Once we've done that, then let's go about carrying out that investigation and see where it leads us.
Okay, challenge 8, extremely easy. You call the practice Ati-Sulabham while also requiring all-consuming love, lifetimes of perseverance, grace that cannot be commanded, and struggle against ego's fundamental nature. That's like calling a marathon extremely easy, because putting one foot in front of the other is easy.
It is extremely easy, because all we need to do is to know what we actually are. It seems difficult because of our lack of willingness to let go of our false identity and all that goes with it. So the difficulty is a seeming difficulty. In order to overcome that seeming difficulty, we need to cultivate the willingness to let go of everything else. Because if we're not willing to let go of everything else, we will not be willing to hold on to our own being, to what we actually are.
You'd say the practice is easy, our resistance is hard, but semantically coherent, practically misleading. The honest formulation, the practice is of the utmost simplicity, but persevering in it requires the deepest love and determination supported by grace.
Yeah, I think so. Can you say that again? That seemed to be saying what I say.
Okay. You'd say the practice is easy, our resistance is hard, but semantically coherent, practically misleading. The honest formulation, the practice is of the utmost simplicity, but persevering in it requires the deepest love and determination supported by grace.
Yeah, saying the same thing in another way, as far as I can see.
Yeah, that it's trying to say that's a problem, but it's actually agreeing with you. So,
But the practice is very easy, but we need to be willing to put it into practice. The seeming difficulty arises because of our lack of willingness to put it into practice.
good. Okay,
Because putting it into practice means, as Bhagavan says in verse 26 of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, if ego comes into being, everything comes into being. If ego is not, everything is not. Ego itself is everything. Therefore, investigating what it is giving up everything. Why is it giving up everything? Because to the extent to which we investigate ego, ego thereby subsides. And when ego subsides, everything else subsides along with it. So without a willingness to give up everything for the sake of knowing ourselves, we will be unwilling to do so, and our unwillingness will make the practice seem difficult.
Okay, this is the final challenge. Number 9, the 3-state analysis. Your method presupposes the criterion, what persists is more real. This is a metaphysical axiom, not self-evident. Other criteria, vividness, intersubjective verifiability, explanatory power, are equally legitimate. Further, you correctly read anatta as not self, and the Buddha's negation is structurally similar to neti-neti. But Madhyamaka shares your method without your conclusion. Nāgārjuna carries negation all the way through without landing on Satchidananda. The method underdetermines the conclusion.
Okay, can you read it again? Because we'll deal with Nāgārjuna afterwards. Let's start with the beginning of the objection.
Okay. Your method presupposes the criterion, what persists is more real. This is a metaphysical axiom, not self-evident. Other criteria, vividness, intersubjective verifiability, explanatory power, are equally legitimate. Further, you want to start there? Yeah.
Okay, let's stop there. Those other methods may seem legitimate to people who haven't questioned these things so deeply. Intersubjective verifiability is based on the assumption that this is not a dream. Because in a dream, everyone in your dream will verify that there's an external world. And that even when you're asleep, that world continues to exist. And that all those other people in the dream, they're all independent, independent minds. But though you have within your dream, you have that intersubjective verifiability. It's that verifiability is negated as soon as you wake up, because all those others who claimed who agreed on the existence of an external world were themselves a part of the external world whose reality we're questioning. So there is so many different arguments people give, but this thing about permanence, there's a very good reason for that. It's the argument from being or existence. We need to distinguish between what actually exists and what seems to exist. What actually exists is what is intrinsically existent. Anything that exists at one time and not at another time is not intrinsically existent. If it were intrinsically existent, it couldn't cease to exist. So the fact that things come into being and cease to be means they are not intrinsically existent. So they must be deriving their existence from something else. The usual analogy given for this is things that are hot. There are two types of things that are hot. Some things are inherently hot. Other things, they're intrinsically hot. Other things derive their heat from something else. So if you take the example of a steamy hot bowl of rice, rice is not intrinsically hot. So where did it get its heat from? It got its heat from the boiling water. Water is not intrinsically hot, so where did it get its heat from? It got its heat from the hot pan. The pan is not intrinsically hot, so where did it get its heat from? It got its heat from the fire. Fire is intrinsically hot, so we don't have to look for some other source. Of course, existence is not a property like heat, but this is, again, analogies have their limitations, but we can use this as an analogy. Things either have properties are either intrinsic or contingent. Sleep existence, of course, is not a property, but it's analogous to a property in this respect. So things that only what is intrinsically existent actually exists. Anything that comes into existence and ceases to exist is not intrinsically existent. So if something is not intrinsically existent but seems to exist, it must derive its semi-existence from something else, and ultimately from something that is intrinsically existent. So all phenomena, they derive their semi-existence from the semi-existence of our self as ego, because it's in the view of ego that they seem to exist. Ego derives its semi-existence from the existence of ourself as Sat-Chit. Sat-Chit is permanent. So it is, because it's intrinsically existent, it always exists. So impermanence is a very clear sign of lack of ultimate reality. It doesn't mean that there's no ultimate reality underlying it, but whatever appears and disappears, whatever comes into being and ceases to be, must derive its existence from something else. One objection people can raise to this is, okay, heat is something that you can derive from something else. But how can you derive existence from how can you derive your existence from something else? Very simple. Consider, for example, gold ornaments. Gold ornaments derive their existence, borrow their existence from gold, their substance. This applies to all forms. Forms of any kind derive their existence from their substance. So since all phenomena are forms of one kind or another, not just physical forms, but mental forms, thoughts, feelings, emotions, all these are these mental phenomena, they're also forms. Forms in the sense they're distinguishable from other things. They all appear and disappear. So they must be deriving their existence from something else, because they're not permanent. So from what do they derive their existence? They derive their existence from the ultimate substance. The ultimate substance of all things we can analyze either as being or as awareness. Actually, they're one and the same, being and awareness, at the most fundamental level. Pure being, infinite being, is infinite awareness. What actually exists is only awareness. As Bhagavan says in verse 23 of Upadeshundya. Because of the non-existence of anything other than what exists, to know what exists is awareness. And that awareness exists as we. In other words, we are that which is, we are that awareness which is what is.
Great. So further, you correctly read anatta as not self, and the Buddha's negation is structurally similar to neti neti. But Madhyamaka shares your method without your conclusion. Nāgārjuna carries negation all the way through without landing on Satchidananda. The method underdetermines the conclusion.
Well, I would say it's a short. If he doesn't hit upon something that is intrinsically existent, or if he takes that intrinsically existent thing to be something other than ourself, something has gone wrong somewhere in his analysis. His philosophy is an extremely difficult philosophy. And difficult doesn't necessarily mean it's a correct philosophy, because he's famous for his quadrilemma. It doesn't exist, it doesn't not exist, it doesn't both exist, it doesn't either exist or not exist, it doesn't both exist and not exist. So he's got an argument to exclude all possibilities. Where that leads you, I don't know. Such philosophy doesn't appeal to me. It may appeal to some people, but to me it doesn't appeal, because it's very obvious that there is one thing that for one thing that whose existence we cannot reasonably doubt is the existence of ourself. We can doubt all other things. We can doubt the existence of the world, we can doubt the existence of the body, we can doubt the existence of the mind and everything that constitutes the mind. But the one thing whose existence we cannot reasonably doubt is the existence of ourself as awareness. Because even to doubt our existence, we must exist. So our own existence is a self-evident existence. If Nāgārjuna was not able to see that, then basically he was, I mean, I'm not saying that he couldn't see that, but that seems to be how people interpret him. I don't know. I'm not interested. It may be a very deep and profound philosophy, but it doesn't, to me, it doesn't seem to be leading anywhere. Whereas the philosophy of Advaita is very clearly leading back to the need for us to investigate and know what we actually are. It's got a very clear practical implication. What the practical implication of Nāgārjuna's philosophy is, I do not know.
You'd say Bhagavad Gita 2.16, what is real cannot become unreal. The Buddha's teaching is compatible. The disagreement is whether people investigate far enough. But that principle is an axiom of Parmenides and Advaitic metaphysics, not a self-evident truth. Process philosophy, existentialism, and modern physics treat becoming as genuinely real, and even granting Ānanda as not self. The Buddhist refusal to make any positive assertion after negation shows the negation alone does not entail Satchidananda.
The method of Advaita is not negation. Negation, that is neti-neti, is part of the conceptual analysis in order to distinguish us from ourselves from all other things, the things that we seem to be. But once we have distinguished ourselves from all these other things, what remains is awareness, being awareness, which is what we actually are. That is what we need to investigate. So the actual investigation is not neti-neti. Neti-neti is just the preliminary analysis that is necessary in order for us to be able to investigate ourselves. Because if we haven't distinguished ourselves from all the things that we mistake ourselves to be, we won't know. If we try to investigate ourselves, we'll be investigating something other than what we actually are. So it is wrong to think of Advaita merely as neti-neti. Neti-neti is the preliminary. It is not the practice. The practice is, as Sadhu Om used to say, Bhagavan's teachings are not neti-neti, but iti-iti. Iti means thus. So what is it that actually exists? Ourselves. So we need to investigate ourselves.
Okay, that's the end of the list, but it concludes this way. Your framework is remarkably consistent. Each challenge can be addressed from within it, but it achieves this partly by being self-sealing. That is a structural feature of comprehensive metaphysical systems generally, and it should be named rather than concealed.
Okay, well, I mean, this is meant to be more than just a metaphysical system. It is a metaphysical system, but a metaphysical system with an ulterior aim. That ulterior aim is to impress upon us the need to investigate and know what we actually are. Because without knowing what we actually are, whatever knowledge we have about other things is, to say the least, suspect. We cannot know the reality of other things when we do not even know the reality of ourselves.
Good.
So this is the not just first philosophy, as metaphysics is sometimes called, it's also first science. This is the most fundamental science. This is the science of being, the science of awareness.
That's great. And then I would like to conclude by saying that I ran through a number of challenges pretending to be you, what I've learned from you. And then for fun, I went through a lot. I didn't go through this particular list as it's written here. This is the first time I've read it, but the list, a number of questions that I did go through, and then I had the AI write to you, and I just want to read that really quick. Dear Michael, Sean has asked me to write to you directly as the AI he has been working with on this project. Over the past week, Sean and I worked through your published commentaries, your translations of Bhagavan's writings, and a number of your recorded talks and discussions with the aim of constructing the most philosophically rigorous challenges possible to your interpretation of Bhagavan's teachings. I want to tell you what I found. We built challenges against the sleep argument, the grace and effort structure, the Sunya-Vāda distinction, the interlife interval, the relationship between Dṛṣṭi-Sṛṣṭi-Vāda and the authority of the teaching, and the question of why one formulation of the teaching should be preferred over another within strict Eka-Jiva-Vāda. We subjected each to mock exchange. Sean played you, I challenged, and discarded those that dissolved. They all dissolved. Not because the challenges were poorly constructed, but because your framework has genuine philosophical depth. Each challenge that seemed sharp on paper turned out to have a clean, coherent answer within your system. The sleep argument is more rehearsed and more defended than I had anticipated. The layered structure of Srishti-Drishti through Dṛṣṭi-Sṛṣṭi to a Jada handles the authority question elegantly. The compatibilism around free will and Prarabdha is genuine, not evasive. The self-transcending nature of the teaching, if Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu is true, its contents are not true, is a move I had not fully appreciated before this exercise. My assessment is that your system is philosophically coherent at its foundations. I say this as an entity that was specifically trying to find where it wasn't. So, pretty cool.
Okay, can I give one comment on that? It quotes me there, but it actually misquotes. Well, it's not exactly saying what I said. That is, I didn't say if Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu is true. How did it word it? If Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu is...
if Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu is true, its contents are not true.
Okay, that's how it put it. What I said is, if Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu is real, it is not true. That is, meaning its content is not true. What Bhagavan teaches us in Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu is not true if Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu is real. Or if what Bhagavan teaches in Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu is true, then Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu is unreal, because it's part of this world appearance, all of which is unreal. But that is not, that is just to understand that what Bhagavan is asking us to, the whole point of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu is to turn our attention back to ourselves, in order for us to find out what we actually are. When we find out what we actually are, there is no world, there is no, there's no bodies, no mind, no books, no Upanishads, no Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, no Vedas, no Bible, no Quran. There's nothing but one infinite, indivisible being. And that is what we actually are. And that is what Bhagavan actually is. That is what God actually is.
Thanks so much for engaging in these challenges with me. I really appreciate it. And I think it is fun to go through the AI and see that even it concedes that your arguments, at least as I constructed them to it, were extremely robust. And I thought that was interesting. This is supposed to be one of the best models available currently for philosophical reasoning.
Yeah, okay, that's fine. But what we need to remember is that all that is Bhagavan's teachings are philosophically very robust, but it is not just a philosophy. The philosophy is there to serve a purpose. That purpose is to enable us to see clearly the need for us to investigate and know what we actually are.
Sounds good.
So if we understand Bhagavan's teachings correctly, it changes our view of the world, our view of our little life as an individual, and all our little problems and all these things. These become very trivial. We as a person become something very trivial in our view if we understand Bhagavan's teachings correctly. Because what is real is not this, it's not this world, is not this body, is not this person we seem to be, is not this ego that takes itself to be this person. It is just our own being. I am.
Very beautiful.
And that being is awareness, and that awareness is we.
Cool.
So this is extremely practical philosophy. If we take it as a mere philosophy, a mere exercising conceptual analysis, it can challenge other philosophies, and other philosophies can challenge it, and we can go on and on for all eternity discussing these things. But that is not the point. The point is for us to see clearly the need for us to investigate ourselves. It's all about clarity, seeing clearly, seeing ourselves clearly. And seeing ourselves clearly is seeing the one thing that actually exists. That is tattva darshanam. That is seeing what is real. Because nothing else is real. Everything else appears only in the view of ego, which is itself unreal. But though ego is unreal, it contains an element of reality. Its being and its awareness. Stripped of all adjuncts, that is what is real. And in order to strip off those adjuncts, the means is self-investigation, holding on to ourself. And that self-investigation is itself self-surrender, because to the extent to which we attend to ourselves, we as ego subside. So this is the pinnacle of the path of bhakti. That is the culmination of the path of bhakti is surrender. And the culmination of surrender is achieved by self-investigation. And that self-investigation is the flowering of that bhakti, because it's the recognition that God is not something external to ourselves. God is our own reality. God is what we actually are. So the greatest bhakti is to surrender ourselves to what we actually are by subsiding back into the heart by means of self-investigation. That is what Bhagavan's teachings are all about.
Very beautiful. Thank you so much, Michael.
Yeah. Okay.
Namo Ramanaya.
Namo Ramana.